Hey, I'm Lance Dutson. This is the advanced team. We've got an all-star panel here today, fresh off of Governor LePage's second inauguration. We're all here and ready to jump in and see what we can make of it. To introduce everybody first, we've got Avery Day, Ben Gilman, Lizzy Reinholt, Stephen Biel, Steve Robinson, and again, I'm Lance Dutson. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us. Avery Day and Ben Gilman were actually at the governor's inauguration today. Avery, I want to start with you and ask you to give us a quick rundown of some of the policy items that the governor laid out in his speech.
Sure thing, Lance. The governor ran through a number of things on his agenda. A lot of them aren't actually surprises, though there were a handful of new things in there. Welfare reform, which came up during the campaign, was the first thing out of the box. Taxes, particularly the income tax, was on the list. But we've been hearing for a little while now that this is high on the governor's target. Infrastructure, and I think one of the new things, he plans to submit some sort of capital budget to the legislature, something we haven't seen before. Energy, education, all issues he's worked on in the past. Smaller government and consolidating government, looking at government efficiencies, also made the list. I think on the education side, he came out with an idea for a statewide teacher contract. Certainly, I think a new idea and something that would be controversial or much debated at the legislature.
All right, Lizzy Reinholt, I was struck by a couple things when I was watching the speech. First, the music selection of Bridge Over Troubled Water right before his official swearing in. I think that had some subliminal tones. But this is what I want to ask you, Lizzy. School consolidation and sales tax expansion, is this Governor Baldacci's second term all over again?
Well, I mean, that's what, we kept hearing from him. He bashed school consolidation, and then he basically outlined school consolidation. Sales tax expansion, I mean, the Republicans ran against sales tax expansion in 2010. It is, one of the most unliked things that I've heard from Republicans when they talk about taxes and how we're going to, right-size the government, how we're going to put more money in the pockets of working people. So once again, what we're seeing is an agenda from him that is very similar to what we've seen from other governors before. He might talk about it differently, but it certainly isn't anything new.
Steve Robinson, is sales tax expansion, which, to be clear, the governor really didn't give any specifics in his speech today. He kind of hinted at it, and I think everybody's waiting for his budget on Friday. But is the idea of moving from an income tax to a consumption tax to sales tax expansion, is that a conservative idea?
Well, I think from a philosophical standpoint, it's always better to tax consumption than it is to tax income. You're at least making the decision to engage in commerce, and you're therefore consenting to the tax. I think no one's going to have an issue when it comes to taxing, ski lift tickets or some of the luxury consumer items.
Wait a minute. No one's going to have an issue. Were you here a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
No, but those were the things that were exempted from the expansion of the sales tax. I think the problem was when you go to expand the sales tax, you get all the lobbyists come and decide, we want an exemption for this, we want an exemption from that, and don't forget it was the legislature, a majority of Democrats and some Republicans who raised the sales tax across the board, which is incredibly regressive and hits poor families the worst.
Yes, Stephen Biel, isn't that the case? Isn't an expansion of taxes away from income tax into consumption tax incredibly regressive, as Steve Robinson said?
Absolutely. I mean, it's, we've already seen a shift under Governor LePage of the tax burden from the people who can most afford to pay to the people who can least afford to pay. And obviously, I consider that unfair.
So who was it that raised the sales tax?
But I think it's also bad for when you raise the sales tax. It's bad for the economy. Even if you're not concerned at all about the fairness issue, we have a consumer-driven economy, and what happens is when you're taking money out of the pockets of people who are going to spend it and transferring that wealth into the pockets of people who are not going to spend it, that starts to answer the question of why the state of Maine is getting lapped by the rest of the region and the rest of the country in terms of job recovery since the end of the Bush recession.
Ben Gilman, is that the case? Is our lack of support for lower income Mainers the reason that big companies are opting not to start their businesses in Maine?
I think we've gone a little bit off topic in talking about the sales tax. I mean, in the governor's speech, he talked about lowering the income tax. Until Friday, we see the budget come out and see how he's going to pay for that. I think that's going to be the important part of his entire budget. But the other portion I want to point out, someone mentioned, lower income Mainers are paying more taxes now. That's just not the case. I mean, we all know the number. 70,000 low income Mainers were taken off the tax rolls when the governor lowered the income tax the last time. So until we see the budget and see the details of it, I think lowering the income tax is a big issue. You talk to any CEO around the country, you talk to any of the employers in Maine, what's the number one issue in terms of moving capital into this state? It's lowering the income tax. It's a discussion we have to have. I think the governor is, putting out an olive branch to the legislature, asking them to work together. I think he struck a conciliatory tone in his speech in regards to that. And I think come Friday we're going to have some serious discussions. But until we see it, talking about expanding the sales tax, I think what we need to focus on is lowering the income tax.
Yeah, I agree with
Ben there.
Go ahead.
We need to be modest about what we can do with the income tax. Obviously, we can't get rid of it altogether. I think we need to look at incrementalism. We don't want to end up in a situation like Kansas is in, but at the same time, bringing down the income taxes is something we can all agree on. We need to put more pockets in people's money. As the governor said, you make it, you should keep it.
Breaking news, Governor LePage is to the right of Steve Robinson on tax policy.
We already cut the income tax, and we're still struggling our way out of that. I mean, let's talk about it. Maine is lagging behind the rest of New England when it comes to job recovery since the bottom of the recession. We're ranked 44th in the country when it comes to job recovery since the bottom of the recession. The rest of the nation has seen 100% job recovery. We're at 58%. We would have 16,000 more jobs if we were growing our economy at the same rate as the rest of the country. So to me, we cut the income tax. What we ended up doing was spending another 3 years trying to fill that budget hole. And yeah, we did raise the sales tax because there was no way we could undo the governor's tax cuts. And in addition to that, we weren't going to put
called cut spending. I think Lizzy's still reading from her Michoud talking points. You cut spending. Raising taxes isn't the only way to generate revenue. You cut taxes and you have more money to spend on things. I mean, you cut spending and you have more money to spend on things that are actually priorities.
But see, what you want to cut spending on is revenue sharing, which is driving up property taxes. I mean, sure as income taxes, they cut low-income Mainers off the rolls. They saved about $7, and then we raised the income tax and raised the sales tax. I mean, what we need to do is roll up our sleeves, work together, and actually take on comprehensive tax reform. But starting with eliminating the income tax and putting that on the table, that's not the right way to go.
I agree with Ben.
I want to go to Avery for a second here. So someone mentioned earlier this conciliatory tone that the governor had. I think it was Ben. Is that how you saw it? Because I got to be honest, I thought it was a pretty aggressive tone for an inaugural speech. What do you think?
I tend to agree with you, Lance. I think the governor brought up the campaign itself, and I was surprised he touched on those. And he spoke directly to the legislature a couple of times and said, the people of Maine have spoken, and I hope you're listening. And I think the implication was that they're not listening.
Yeah, I think the quote from the governor at the beginning of the speech was that the campaign got so bad that even he started hating himself. So I thought that was a pretty good line. Steve Biel, what do you think? What do you think about the tone of the governor's speech today?
Well, I mean, he didn't call anyone any names. He didn't tell anybody to kiss his ass or go to hell. I think anytime you can get through a public appearance with Governor LePage without any of those things happening, it's a win for his public relations team. So we should give them credit. I think I think speeches don't matter. I agree with Ben. Ultimately, what matters is policy. I think the governor has a problem, which is that he ran for re-election and won re-election by telling people that we can cut or even get rid of the income tax and not pay for it.
I don't think that's right at all. I think the governor ran number one of welfare.
He said that we can pay for it all just by going after welfare cheats and illegal immigrants. That's fantasy. It's a great 30-second ad, but it doesn't add up. Now, if he can show us a budget that has a line item that says the cost of getting rid of the income tax, and then the savings from cracking down on this fantasy of welfare, epidemic of welfare cheats that he thinks is going on, and those numbers equal, if he can put forward a budget that shows those two things are equal, then I'll be impressed. And as a progressive,
you're attacking a straw man.
I believe in efficient government. I think that'll be great. But people are expecting to get something for nothing, and the governor's got a problem. He's got to now show his math, and people are going to see that they're getting something different what they thought they were voting for.
All right, Steve Robinson, what do you think about that? I mean, do you think?
I think Steve's attacking a straw man. I don't think anyone who looks at the budget thinks that welfare fraud is going to equal all the money we get from an income tax, and I'm not sure that that's a position that LePage himself has articulated. But he did run on a position of welfare reform. That's something that Democrats in the 126th legislature opposed. They fought tooth and nail common sense welfare reforms, and they're not going to be able to do that anymore. The people of Maine. I mean, I know Lizzy doesn't think that it was a mandate, but he got more votes than any governor in the history of Maine, and he ran on a platform of welfare reform. But one thing he needs to do is he needs to focus on tiering the welfare system. We can't have individuals who are on welfare who are trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps face a decision where if they work an extra hour, they lose $150 in welfare benefits. That just doesn't make any sense. I think Democrats and Republicans can agree that we need to tier the system. I can't for the life of me figure out why Governor LePage didn't tackle that in his first term in office, but that's something that needs to be a top priority in this legislative session. And it's an area where I think Mark Eves and Justin Alfon could get right on board with. No one should be punished for working more.
And I absolutely agree with you, Steve Robinson. I think we do need a tiered welfare system, but what we've seen Republicans propose time and time again is what is a so-called tiered system, when really it just cuts more people off before they have the opportunity to get into that position of work. What we need is real comprehensive reform. I think that's something that even Congressman Michaud talked about on the campaign trail. So
there's no Democrats proposing comprehensive reform, except for Medicaid expansion. That's not reform.
Democrats, excuse me, but Governor LePage also touted Mark Eves' welfare to work bill when he wasn't even willing to help him get it passed.
That was something that was done administratively before Mark Eves even proposed it. And it's just a little fix nibbling around the edges.
Then why did the governor tout it so much once it finally went into action and started working?
Because he's willing to accept any kind of welfare reform, but the big reforms, the work search requirement, that was voted down by Democrats who think it's too much of a burden to ask people to look for a job before they go to government for assistance.
And at the end of the day, if the governor can show us that he's going to be able to find the savings and pay for an income tax elimination, then I'm eager to see that proposal. But as I see it, what he went after in his address was he went after cutting revenue sharing. He went after talks about education and the fact that we overfund education. And if he's going to find his way to pay for an income tax reduction by cutting education, cutting revenue sharing, we're going to have some serious problems, I think, moving into this legislative session and seeing folks actually come to an agreement on a budget.
Okay, so
I don't think he said. Can I jump in here real quick, Lance?
Yeah,
he didn't say we overfund education. I think he said, we misappropriate our spending of education dollars here in the state of Maine. And he even said, threw the gauntlet down, saying that he wanted to get to 56%, not 55%, which is that magical number that we, put into statute, 30 years ago, and the people ratified it.
Actually, voters passed it by referendum, so.
By referendum, but it was actually a policy decision back in the 70s that was put into place the 55% number. But he never said that we're underfunding education. I think if you look at the allocation of dollars is where he was getting at. And it is true. If you look at anyone, where are our dollars going? They're going to administrative costs. Our education system is top-heavy. Not enough dollars are getting into the classroom. That was his point. I think he was very clear about that. And it's too bad that a topic like that has to be controversial, that more dollars aren't getting into the classroom.
Well,
I think folks agree on that issue.
One of the things that's going to be very hairy for Governor LePage is dealing with Common Core. I know that the conservative grassroots are really up in arms about Common Core. They view it as Washington D.C.'s takeover of education. It's going to be a theme of the presidential election with Jeb Bush coming into power, and Governor LePage, Governor Baldacci initiated it, but Governor LePage's fingerprints are on Common Core in Maine, and it's something that he's going to have to deal with.
Absolutely. I mean, isn't that the deal? Isn't it the deal that that Governor LePage, through Steve Bowen and through the 125th Legislature, basically bought on to Common Core? I mean, this seems like a sticky issue that they're going to have to be very careful about. I mean, what's the base going to do when this discussion comes up? Are they opening up Pandora's box to explain a policy decision that they would be angry about if they were paying attention during the 125th Legislature?
So I think Governor LePage is in a position where he's going to have to come back and say, "Hey, I was wrong. I didn't know what I bought onto. Some of my advisors, weren't frank with me. I trusted them, but this Common Core thing is something I'm not willing to sign on to." And they might look at doing like what they did in Indiana by having a pause bill, pausing the implementation of Common Core. But it's a very complex, very tricky issue. But I know he's going to have lots of activist pressure on him from the homeschooling community, from Tea Party groups, because they are not happy with Common Core. And it was kind of a well-kept secret during the campaign that Governor LePage's fingerprints were all over Common Core in Maine, and I think he does realize that it's something that his base isn't happy with. We'll see if he goes to work on it. But again, I think taxes, welfare reform, energy are probably higher priorities for him at this point.
So, Lizzy, isn't that common ground right there? I mean, aren't there many on the left that oppose Common Core in Maine as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when it comes to Common Core, you see that I think folks like the concept of it, but implementation has been an absolute mess. And one of the other problems has been that we haven't been adequately providing resources to the public schools to be able to actually implement it the way it should be implemented. And what turned into something of having common standards, we actually have what's turned into teaching to the test again with this smarter balance test that teachers are spending significant amounts of time actually teaching kids just how to take the test, let alone teaching them what they need to know to actually pass it. So I think that's something that people are going to be able to find common ground on. That's something that teachers are frustrated with and angry about. I think we all want standards. It's how we do it. And I think that we need to let teachers do what they do best and teach. And we're going to have to figure out how to work through this and figure out the best way to move our schools forward and provide kids with the best education we can.
So, Avery, I alluded earlier to the comparison of what the governor laid out and Governor Baldacci's second term. And what I mean by that is essentially when he talks about changing the funding mechanisms for education, he's talking about consolidation. And we know that that's something that Governor Baldacci took on and I think got pretty beat up on through the course of its implementation. And the other thing is again, what we were talking about before with the potential expansion of sales tax. Are these issues too difficult for a governor, especially one that received 48% of the vote, to take on? I mean, it seems to me that Democrats might be wise just to kind of sit back and watch him try to go down these roads that people before him have gone down and not really survived.
I'm not sure, Lance. The agenda was long. The issues were big. This governor doesn't nibble around the edges. And a lot of these fights have been slogged out in years past, so the battle lines are pretty hardened. We'll say he's a pretty energetic governor and wants to push it. Obviously, he's not going to succeed in every point he hit on today, but he's had a remarkable record of accomplishment in his first term, and I think he'll get a lot done.
So, Stephen Biel, I want to know what you think about how the Democrats in the legislature, particularly, how do they deal with Paul LePage coming into this first session? Are they combative? Are they staking out their claim on their most important progressive issues, or are they going to try to be seen as more friendly to the business community and as partners in getting job growth going in Maine?
Well, I mean, the governor is the governor. He won. And which I wasn't happy about, but part of that means that it's now on him to set the agenda. He's the one who has the responsibility to put forward a plan for where he wants the state to go, how he's going to close the job gap. Again, we've only recovered. We're still trying to catch up to the number of jobs that we had at the end of the Great Recession, and I think that's it's up to him to show how we're going to do that. And then I think it's also, it's important how Democrats respond. I think it's also important, to look at how Republicans in the legislature respond. I mean, in 2010, Governor LePage came in tremendously overreached and got wiped out in the next election, lost both houses of the legislature. He's not going to face voters again. It's going to be interesting to see how state senators who want to keep their seats, who I think in a presidential year it's going to be an uphill fight for Republicans to keep the state Senate even under the best of circumstances. If you have a governor overreaching like he did in 2011, setting himself up for setting up his party for another wipeout election, I think he before he even gets to Democrats, he might have problems with his own party.
Okay, so one thing I'll take issue with, and Ben, I want to talk to you about this. overreaching in 2011. I know that the discussion among Republicans is that it was a squandered opportunity in 2011, that the Republicans didn't get along with themselves enough to be able to pass real strong reform. Do you think this emboldened Republican state political machine is going to look back on 2011 and say we need to be bolder and stronger and come out and swing for the fences a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think a little bit, Lance. I mean, I think in 2010 you had a party taking over a system that hadn't controlled it since 1968, all three branches of government. So I think they were trying to figure it out at the time. I think this time around they've now been successful in 2 of the last 3 elections. I think you're going to see a little more. They're going to be a little bit bolder. I think they're going to be smarter about it this time around. And let's also not forget that most of what Governor LePage has proposed or brought forward to the legislature, at the end of the day, he usually wins. Whether it be paying back the hospitals, bonds, you look at some of the major fights that he had in the budget, he usually is successful. He had a lot of vetoes, but I think this time around, lessons learned from 2010, and I think that you're going to see him a little bit more aggressive, and I think you're going to see a bolder agenda.
One area where I'd like to see him be much more aggressive is on energy reform. He alluded to it in his inauguration address, but I think Democrats and Republicans like to rail against crony capitalism, but very few are willing to look at the biggest crony capitalists we have in the state, which is industrial wind power. I think the line that he says where he's open to all energy, I think should be the approach that we take. We need to end the favoritism we have for wind power and let all energy sources compete, and in the end, the consumer benefits from that free market competition.
Lizzy, is wind industry in Maine crony capitalism?
Well, no, and here he goes off saying we don't need we can't have winners and we can't have losers, and yet then he goes and outlines subsidies for natural gas. Look, I understand we need a diversified energy portfolio, but we have clear winners in his administration. We have natural gas, and then you're certainly a loser when you're Statoil, which here's a company that was ready to come in, invest hundreds of millions of private sector dollars, create jobs, and also help diversify the energy portfolio so that we're not so beholden to natural gas. I mean, we all know what we have is an energy system where most of our prices are tied to natural gas. When it spikes, we spike. The more we can diversify our energy resources, the lower we're going to be able to make our energy costs. So as far as I'm concerned, I want to be open to everything. I don't want winners and losers, but he can't walk out there and claim he doesn't want winners and losers when he's driving out Fortune 500 companies that want to invest here while also wanting to subsidize natural gas.
I agree with Lizzy on that note. I think that the governor has said, we don't want to have winners and losers, but he has picked natural gas as a winner, and it was a pragmatic consideration. And I agree that kicking Statoil out of the state might not have been the best decision either. But at the same time, that has nothing to do with the continued favoritism at the Public Utilities Commission. The wind power bill that was passed under Baldacci. This favoritism for wind power doesn't benefit the consumer. And I think that you're going to see a ballot initiative coming forward if it gets enough signatures to make some serious changes to that law. And I think we need to end the favoritism that we have for wind power. Wind power, build it if it's affordable, but don't subsidize it. Don't make the taxpayers and the ratepayers subsidize this practice.
Ben Gilman, how much do you
every
think this
form of energy? I mean, I'm sorry, we subsidize every form of energy, and we have been for generations and for decades. You can't
but you can't deny that wind power gets favorable treatment in this state.
Yes,
okay.
I can, actually.
I want to cap this energy conversation off real quick, just with Ben Gilman. Do you think this debate is going to take place in the legislature this session? I mean, is this something?
Absolutely. This is going to be probably one of the biggest issues. I do think this is going to be one issue that everyone's going to come together on, believe it or not, at the end of the day. Because the fact is, come March, when we're looking at our electricity costs and CMP looking to increase the standard offer rates, it's going to be a big deal, and it's going to be a big topic, and they're going to have to come together. And a lot of it has to do with, natural gas. You can say he's picking winners and losers, but the fact is the pipe coming into New England is too small for the capacity. It has to be built out. We need all the sources that possibly in the portfolio. If you look at, the wind development, yeah, you can dislike wind, but the fact is over the last 8 years, they've invested over $1 billion into our economy here in the state. And you can also look at the oil industry and the price of oil. But the fact is, this is going to be the big issue coming into the middle of the legislative session, and they're going to have to deal with it. And I predict at the end of the session, it will be one issue which they do come together on.
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely. Together on it in 2013 as well.
So to wrap up here, we're going to go down the line, and I want everybody to give a letter grade for the governor and his speech today, and tell me why. So we're going to start with you, Avery. What did Paul LePage earn for a letter grade today with the speech?
I'll give him an A. I think he did a good job, and he had a few laugh lines in there, particularly when he talked about his change in position when he was mayor versus governor, and we saw a genuine side of him. I'm hoping to see more of that throughout his administration.
All right, Stephen Biel, what letter grade would you give Paul LePage for his second inaugural speech today?
I mean, it's an incomplete. It doesn't matter. Really, speeches don't matter. Like he said himself, talk doesn't matter, action matters. We need to see what's in the budget. I mean, it was a fine speech. I particularly liked his music choice to open, the Edith Piaf, big fan. So, you know, if forced to say a letter grade, it was a solid B. Nobody watched.
Ben Gilman.
I'm going to go with an A-. I think he really did hit all the high points, but I think taking on local control, an issue that's dating 200 years in Maine, you know, the local New England town hall meetings, taking that issue on directly, that's going to be the toughest one, but overall, A-.
All right, Steve Robinson. What's your letter?
Yeah, I would give him an A- too. You know, I might not have led with welfare reform. I might have led with some more uplifting things and tried to strike a more conciliatory tone, because he did win a big re-election. He is in a stronger position with the legislature, but at the end of the day, he's going to have to work with Democrats in the House, and he's got a long, bitter history with Mark Eves and some of the other Democrats that he needs to start going to work on. You know, just working with Barry Hobbins, the LePage whisperer, isn't going to be enough this time around.
All right, Lizzy Reinholt, letter grade for Paul LePage in his inaugural speech.
I'm gonna give him, a B+. I think it was a fine speech. He did no harm, didn't say anything crazy, didn't, cause a ruckus anywhere. He laid it out there. I don't think he really had a lot of, I don't think it was all that interesting, but the notion that he could get Spruce Budworm into an inaugural dress and actually have it make sense, I think deserves some major kudos.
Okay, I think I'd give him also an A-. I'd give him an A+, except he made fun of Garrett Mason's new beard, and I take offense to that on behalf of the senator from Androscoggin County. So thanks so much for being with us here today, guys. Avery Day, Ben Gilman, Lizzy Reinholt, Stephen Biel, Steve Robinson. I'm Lance Dutson for the Advanced team. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time.